Hello, this is Henry Keane, and this is UATV. Welcome. Today we're joined by someone who explains complex military topics, indeed, in plain language, to millions of viewers around the world. Preston Stewart, former U.S. Army Field Artillery Officer and military analyst. Preston, great to have you here with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Today, Preston is going to help us, I hope, to figure out how a $400 cost drone is connected to the Russian army's retreat across 126 square kilometers in a single week, in between 136 Shadow Fleet vessels, as well as Russia's last untouched, well, touched as of now, oil refinery, and air defense that the Kremlin keeps holing across the country in a desperate, if you ask me, attempt to patch one hole at a time. So one chain, let's take it link by link. But first things first, Preston, you were recently in Ukraine in person. You saw this war closer. So what's one thing you saw there that changed your perspective maybe of this war, if that was the case?
It was a great visit. So we had an opportunity to spend some time in Odessa at the Black Sea Security Forum, and then a few days later went to Kherson with a good friend, Ken Harbaugh, and dropped off some supplies at his school and met with an air defense unit there. The dichotomy of the two is always striking. When you go from a beautiful city like Odessa, this was in the middle of a major international forum. So they had parties and people had flown in from all around the world. And you go from that to at night with an air defense unit shooting down Russian drones and missiles is it's very weird to see that. It's inspiring that life goes on and people are trying their best to make to have a normal life day in and day out. But it's just, I don't think you can ever get used to that. I can't ever get used to that coming in from time to time. But the second big one was in Kherson. We had the opportunity to go to a school and drop off some supplies. And I have an 8-year-old daughter, and it just hit home for me that the kids were in the basement because that was the only safe place. And then we went outside to look at the playground. They had a little memorial there for the children that had been killed in Russian strikes. And we were looking at that, and the drone detector went off. It was relatively clear skies, and they were explaining that, on clear days, the kids can't play outside. And that was the polar opposite of the conversation I have with my daughter when I take her to school in the morning. When we see clouds in the sky, it's, oh no, you might not be able to play outside. So to think that children are having the exact opposite experience was pretty impactful.
Yeah, clouds, the smoke, the plume of smoke here. Well, but Ukraine, talking about the fleet, the Black Sea fleet, Ukraine is wrecking the Russian fleet without having one on its own in 10 days. I mean, Ukrainian drones hit 136 vessels of Russia's Shadow Fleet, 116, if I'm not mistaken, in the Sea of Azov, and another 20 or so in the Black Sea in a single night. 17 tankers, 2 gas carriers, and a tugboat. So Russia has already halted traffic through the Don Azov Canal and the Kerch Strait. And all of this for Ukraine without having a single classic Ukrainian warship actually involved, simply because Ukraine has none. So Preston, you titled your latest video on the naval operations. Phase 2 just began. Why? What the meaning of that?
So it sounds like Robert Madyar, the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, is talking about phase 2 shifting to the Black Sea.
Right.
Now, Ukraine has been hitting ships in the Black Sea. That hasn't stopped, but it looks like that's going to be the focus from the Sea of Azov. It's not unlikely that the traffic in the Sea of Azov has just fallen off. So that supply route into Crimea, from what we can tell, is just a fraction of what it used to be. It sounds like phase 2 is going to be focused more on shipping even further out from Crimea in the Black Sea.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here. Russia is major continental power, right? With, railroads and pipelines and everything. So ships burn, yes, but the oil's still flowing. So is the blockade a real thing or just, fancy footage for the news?
It is a real thing in Crimea, and it's been interesting to see how how it's being reported on Russian channels as primarily an information operation. It's not real; it's just what you're seeing on the news. Okay. But when you see reports from the citizens in Crimea and some of the military folks stationed there, it is a very real issue. I think Russia is doing a good job of kind of tamping down the panic and the chaos. There's not a lot of news coming out about how bad it's actually getting, but there's lines at gas stations. There are military units talking about the restrictions on fuel. And even if you move beyond that, the fact that Russia has not been able to stop these strikes in of itself is significant. So any peninsula is very challenging to hold for any military around the world ever. It's harder to hold that than just a regular piece of terrain, and Russia's experiencing that right now. I don't know that we're going to see some major turn in the next couple days or
Right.
even weeks, but the situation in Crimea is no doubt getting worse for Russia by the day.
And how Ukraine is doing, to me, it's amazing. I mean, the July 15th, the $400 Shrike 10 HPV drone is seeking and destroying mission caught like Mi-28 assault helicopter, Russian helicopter worth what? 15, $20 million just in midair. So that is a stunning difference right there. 1 to 47,000 exchange rate. So you are trained as an artillery officer. Can you please help us to do the math? What does the war cost Russia just one day? I know it's a speculation, but just roughly. Can they manage this? Because it's obviously enormous.
So this is a problem that we're dealing with in the United States right now as well. As hostilities continue in the Middle East around Iran, they're using very low-cost munitions. We don't have great low-cost interceptors quite yet. So this is a new style of warfare that I think the entire world is trying to adapt to right now. Ukraine and Russia, of course, on the very bleeding edge of that day in and day out. Long story short, it's not sustainable over the long term. You can trade 100, 200, probably 3,000 drones before you even come close to the price point of a helicopter. And we're seeing the adaptation there. I mean, it's rare to see helicopter operations anywhere near the front, which is why it's such a story when a bird a couple days ago did get hit. They're just not there. It's too risky. We're seeing the same thing, to go back to the conversation about Crimea. The Black Sea Fleet is rarely leaving port. And the reason for that is this trade-off of low-cost drones for high-cost surface vessels. So it's impacting the war in a way that we can see day in and day out. Long-term, not sustainable. Air defense is another great example here, and I think we're probably going to get into that in a moment. Nobody has enough air defense systems. Ukraine has found ways to use low-cost drones to eliminate Pantsir, Buk, and other assets. Those can't be built fast enough. Every single one of those that goes down opens a gap for a significant period of time.
Exactly. And Ukraine produces what, 10 million drones a year, roughly? And it is aiming, as Zelensky just recently said, to 20 million. It's a staggering figure. You once told Ukraine, even if we are keeping up to 15, it's quite enough. You once told Ukrainian manufacturers that the world will be lining up for these technologies of after the war. But if I'll do like this, do I see the Pentagon in there in the end of the line already, Preston?
I don't know. I think in some ways, at the very least, we're learning. I think one of the big lessons taken away here is not just the technology that Ukraine is developing, but also the need to have the manufacturing all done in-house. We cannot rely on China. You guys cannot rely on a number of different countries. Maybe we'll stick with China as a good example. Russia, on the other side, saw their imports and exports largely shut off at the beginning of the war and had to adapt. So I think there's a lot of learning happening. We're seeing the effects. I think in the United States, our big takeaway is more on the defensive side, or at least it should be, how to shoot down. Our adversaries are going to have a lot of these low-cost munitions. But I think a bigger takeaway, rather than the actual technology, is the mindset shift. It has to be rapid. It has to be innovative. It has to happen with interactions for the frontline units. We can't afford to take 6 to 10 years to build something that looks good on paper that may or may not be solving issues in the battlefield. We need to take the model of iterating with soldiers at the front. What works today may not work tomorrow.
Let me ask you a question, just from the back of my mind, just a thought. Do you think that the axis of evil, China is also teaching and learning and gathering information in intel, and everyone is looking at how exactly Ukraine is fighting and how exactly the United States is reacting on how Ukraine is fighting?
Absolutely. In fact, we just saw some images come out yesterday that the Syrian government stopped a shipment of munitions moving into Lebanon for Hezbollah. And they didn't cite the origin, but you have to assume these probably came via Iran. Either way, these were fiber optic FPVs. That would have been hard to imagine. I mean, just a few years ago, nobody else was using FPVs at baseline.
Right.
Now to see fiber optics making their way onto that battlefield, 100%. They're learning, they're adapting. And I think at times we maybe underestimate that our adversaries are taking these same lessons.
Okay, let us slide to Russia's weak points, so to say, from burning refineries to retreat on the front line. So my main question is, Preston, you are, again, artillery officer, and as artillery officer, you know, the war is, what, 90% logistics and careful planning and maybe about 10% actually pulling the trigger. So with a critical fuel shortage, and it's Russian air defense crews rolling out to their positions with nearly empty tanks, and like what, minus 126 square kilometers lost in 1 week for Russia. Are all these events intertwined and connected, or am I just, wishful thinking here?
It seems to be a pretty smart move by Ukraine over the course of the last couple of years, and we get hyper-focused on what happened today or this week and kind of lose sight of how this has played out over time. So we've seen a systemic targeting of Russian air defense by Ukrainian drones. These drones, in many cases, were too small for the air defense systems to pick up on them, or they didn't have ammunition capable of shooting them down. What that meant was more and more areas were open for Ukrainian strikes. And a year, 2 years ago, destroy Russian air defense, that's good. But no Ukrainian aircraft are going to be flying into those skies. The helicopters are avoiding the front. There's some missiles, no doubt. But what we've seen is that Ukraine has been able to adapt with longer range, more effective, more in quantity drones. So as those air defense systems go down, it's just exponential. I mean, there's a reason that we're seeing more strikes day in and day out. It's because more areas are becoming susceptible to these attacks. Now, in terms of what that means at the front, again, the focus is always territory changed, 5 kilometers here, or Konstantinivka fell or did not. But what we're seeing more and more is Russia's having a bit of a challenge right now at keeping the front line resupplied. That right out the gate shows an impact on offensive operations. And long-term, you just can't hold terrain. It takes a lot of supplies to keep a military even alive at distance in unfriendly territory. So every one of these refinery strikes has an impact. It builds over time. It gets worse and worse. If the export drops by 1%, by 5%, by 20%, that has a real impact on the war effort. It's not as tangible as seeing the front lines change day in and day out. But I would argue, big picture, it has a larger impact.
Well, I would argue the same. I hear the voices, skeptics say, strikes on refineries, it's just a media effect, a picture for media. Russia patches the holes, sells crude oil, and then frontline is holding. It is holding, at least for now. So 1 week, 126 kilometers. They say, this is my point. And their point is, well, it's just another good week for Ukraine, that's all. So what would you need to see, what they would need to see over the next month to say, for example, to say on camera, yes, this isn't just a good week for Ukraine anymore, there's something else. This is more. This is a collapse of Russian logistics. What would that be? What would be the sign of time? What would that be?
I think a good thing to keep an eye on would be the number of offensive operations and attacks. Ukraine does track that day to day and week to week and see what that volume looks like. We've already seen a strange mix there where the number of attacks had increased in recent months, but they were more 1 and 2 soldier assaults. So kind of an increase, but also not really. That's what we're waiting to see when the frontline soldiers very clearly are having a hard time, because if they can't get fuel there, then they can't get medical supplies, they can't get ammunition, all of that snowballs. So that's what we're really keeping an eye on. The thing is, Russia is going to be that is such an important intelligence issue that Russia is going to keep that very, very close held, very difficult to discern that. And you have to expect that they're going to be rationing, as we've already seen, civilian use of some of these materials before it hits the military. So probably we will see additional shortages and queues lined up across portions of Russia, additional fuel rationing that will eventually reach the military. And when we start to see a significant slowdown of offensive operations, that's the path we're on. And again, I think it's premature and overly optimistic to talk about a collapse of the Russian front line. But the natural progression of this, running out of fuel, not being able to get the logistics to the front, that's what happens down the road.
What if I will try to push you to even more premature answer? If I will try to speculate and calculate time, like it's about the money, right? So oil is the Kremlin's cash register, the war chest that is there. And contract payments, and it's only way to recruit soldiers without new mobilization. They need money. So how many months can Russia keep up paying for this war and putting out fires at its own refineries at the same time? Because it's a big thing. Before it has to choose one or the other, because I don't see it happening just yet.
I agree. It has not happened yet. And I want to be careful with not correctly estimating Russia's ability to deal with some of this. If we go back to the beginning of the war, some of these economic sanctions should have shut the country down. We thought it would.
Yes.
And they've adapted. They've adapted pretty well, all things considered. So I would like to see more sanctions. I think, you were mentioning a minute ago the strikes being performative on refineries. One strike on a refinery is performative. We're not seeing one strike. We're seeing repeated strikes day after day after day. And some of these fires are burning for a couple days at a time.
Right.
That adds up over time, right? But in terms of how long it'll take before we see some large-scale Russian collapse or a major impact to their economy, I think we've been too optimistic on that in the past. But no doubt there is a breaking point. Every country, every individual has a breaking point. The screws are getting tighter and tighter, but I think it'd be very hard to predict if that's something we're going to see in the next few weeks, months, or it could take years.
Okay. Well, I would love to. I know this is just a speculation, Preston. This is not the real data where I'm trying to squeeze out of you one. But when there isn't enough of a resource to go around, someone has to decide who gets saved first, right? At some point. And so the Russian army is in exactly that position with fuel right now, like aviation, armor, air defense, and ammunition trucks are all literally standing in the same line for the same tank, all getting burned on the road in Crimea. So build that line for us from a Russian headquarters point of view. Who gets fuel the first? Do you know? And what exactly will we see on the front line the moment that the tanks run dry? Let's imagine that. No more petrol, no more fuel, or almost no, for the Kremlin's war. What happens next? Will the front line collapse immediately after that?
So to extrapolate that out to there's no fuel moving at all, the front line will collapse because you can't keep the soldiers supplied. The soldiers in many areas of the front, there's no local economy that's going to keep the soldiers functioning, fed in, say, Konstantinivka or in the Pokrovsk direction. It's not like they can just walk down the street to a store and buy what the Ministry of Defense can no longer bring their way. So when fuel shuts down, that is a collapse of the front line. They will not be able to hold. In the near term, this is an impossible situation that no country ever wants to find themselves in. When you have to make a determination, let alone in the military who gets the priority, that's already a challenge in war. You want unlimited resources. But when you have to step back from that and start deciding, do citizens or do emergency services get these resources, or does the military in a time of war? That's a lose-lose situation. There's no positive way to do that. Of course, if Putin and the Kremlin were to choose to prioritize the military, the war would go on longer at the front, and we would likely see continued Russian advances. Right. If he chooses to 100% keep the citizens happy, you're going to see a collapse.
The other way around, right.
He has to find a middle ground. And what we're seeing right now are small shortages at the front and increasing frustration inside of Russia. That is a awful balancing act for anybody to have to deal with, and that's what Putin is working through right now.
So, well, the blanket is just always too short, right? Just too short. So Russia's air defense against the system. But what I want to talk is about the Russian air defense system that is and what Ukraine is building. So, Preston, it looks like to me, I'm not an expert at all, but it looks like to me we're watching just sort of a cycle. Ukraine strikes, Russia just drags the air defense over to plaster where it hurts. Ukraine strikes exactly at the naked spot immediately, right after that. So Russia is always playing what? Catch up in this game. So my question is Ukraine just that fast? Or has the Russian system physically stopped being able to keep up to such a pace, if ever they could?
This was an unfair fight as soon as Ukraine started developing kind of mass-produced long-range drones, it very quickly became untenable for Russia. Again, I want to stress that this is something that most countries around the world are going to be dealing with in the near term. So if you think of the opening phases of the war, Russia had a substantial air defense network, considered one of, if not the most robust in the world, but they were primarily focused on intercepting long-range missiles and then aircraft. Well, Ukraine started developing these small drones in mass volume, and Russia wasn't needing to shoot down thousands or hundreds of missiles a day. That wasn't really in the cards, at least for an extended period of time.
Right.
Now they have to. These raids night after night are 300, 400, 500, 600 Ukrainian drones that have to be intercepted. The Russian technology, the kind of legacy air defense wasn't built for this type of sustained volume. Again, to stress, neither is ours in the United States, which is why I hope we lean heavily on Ukraine for some of this interceptor technology. That's what you're seeing. So it's just completely overwhelmed Russian air defense. From the opening of the war, they have been forced to defend more areas at a deeper range, and day by day, they have less equipment. So even if Ukraine had not destroyed any Russian air defense assets, the increase in range by these Ukrainian drones means that Russia has to protect more with less. And I think it's about once a week we see a strike something like 2,000 kilometers inside of Russian territory.
Right.
They just, to be blunt, don't have enough to cover all of that area, and we're seeing the effects of it every day.
Okay, you don't see any system behind that. It couldn't be a logical system or hidden intel that we don't know. It's just not enough force and military equipment to cover the whole Mother Russia, right? Is that what you're saying?
For the most part. Now, Russia is innovating. They are trying to come up with new systems, and they have developed new systems throughout the war, just not in volume to be able. Again, Russia's weakness here is their size of their territory. There's too much to protect. They can't mass all of their air defense in one location and hope to protect everything. We've seen day after day strikes in Crimea and then to the north, strikes east of Moscow, and it's too big for them to defend against this current threat. That's the issue. Now, with that, Ukraine is gathering intelligence and carrying out very smart strikes each day. So every drone that flies is gathering intel on Russian air defense and electronic warfare. So they're finding those gaps. They're not just throwing things at the wall, hoping that a few get through. They are taking advantage of when those gaps arise and massing drones through there for maximum effect.
Okay, so while Russia still does that, moves its old systems around the map, Ukraine is not sitting idle, right? We're building new own anti-ballistic capabilities. 3 of them at once, just by the way. The Patriot license Trump promised, French licenses for Aster-30, and Scalp missiles and hammer bombs, right? Glide bombs. And its own interceptor, Freya, which with 9 partners is expected to be up and running with hopefully a year, 12 months. But a license is just a piece of paper, Preston, right? And a production line is concrete, steel, and people. So my question in this regard is, can Ukraine's approach to scaling more or less simple tech, like drones, production, actually be applied to, all these high-tech, hardened, heavy missiles? And where's the real bottleneck for us here? Money, components, people, maybe?
I hope so. Not just for Ukraine's sake, but for all of us. This is ballistic missile defense is very expensive, and there's never enough. We're seeing that right now. Again, there's pretty clearly a shortage in Ukraine. We've seen in recent days a number of missiles get through, more missiles than usual. But our allies around the world, in the United States right now, in the Middle East, we need more interceptors. That is a challenge. Now, the Patriot license is a step in the right direction. That's good news, but it's also something we shouldn't really plan on having a major impact for a couple of years. On top of that, building anything of that scale in Ukraine comes with significant risk. If Russia were to identify any location in that supply chain, it slows the production timeline of something that already takes too long to build.
Right.
So again, the Patriot license, great. It's a positive step. I don't think that's anything that anyone should count on in the short term. Ukraine has come up with so many innovative products that were unthinkable just a few years ago. I'm optimistic that will lead to some sort of viable, affordable ballistic missile defense. But that is a very challenging problem to solve. So fingers crossed.
Yes, well, all the fingers that I have are actually crossed, and because the necessity breeds is the mother of innovation, right? We don't have any other choice, if you ask me, but to build the systems out. Right? But another question: United States recently struck Iran, so you covered that on your channel. Here's the question people in Ukraine keep asking me, so I'm readdressing this question to you now. Interceptors, munitions, and production lines. Is that one shared American resource split between two wars, or these wars are having separate budgets? And if they are shared, where is Ukraine already feeling that competition, let's put it that way, today?
Yeah, I don't think you can separate these out entirely. If you now there's contracts in place with what we are going to sell and what we've manufactured to our allies, and those could be purchased through the Pearl program to provide to Ukraine. And I believe those are still ongoing, but we have seen a reallocation of priorities over the last couple of years under this administration, where they have deprioritized Ukraine. I think Taiwan at one point as well, to send munitions to different allies. That's the issue that is going to be taking center stage right now. So this is the United States at war. Those patriots in the Middle East, in many cases, are used to protect American service members and American bases. Right. So I would not be surprised if at some level up the chain of command, the decision is made to prioritize the backfill of those before anything makes its way to Europe through our European allies and then to Ukraine. So I've not seen anything concrete yet, but it would make sense that if there is a shortage or if we need to reallocate resources, the priority is going to be the United States for those munitions for a period of time, which again leads to possible further shortages in Ukraine.
Yep, absolutely understandable. Well, common sense, which is not so common these days. But anyway, final question to this lovely interview. Preston, to wrap up things, what's the very first thing you check every morning to gauge which way this war is tilting?
Oh, good question. So there's not a channel or a thing I check. There's a number of what I think are very reliable accounts on Twitter. So I open that up and see what my friends have said that are staying up overnight. So we've got some folks in the UK, for instance, that I think are very reliable. They're already awake. They're already working. They're getting after it. So I just take a look at what they've said in the last few hours. And usually if anything significant is kicked off, they're on top of it. So I'm sleeping in a little bit and able to piggyback off of their hard work in the middle of the night here in the United States. And then, of course, first thing, jump into a number of Telegram channels and try to understand exactly what happened in a little more detail.
Well, I'm absolutely sure that tomorrow you're going to check out how many views are on UATV interview with you, Preston, right? This is what
Absolutely.
You will do.
There we
right.
go.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your stance towards Ukraine. Thank you, Preston, for being here, for taking a glimpse what is actually happening, for helping us break down today the problems facing the Russians are facing with their military, and we are facing actually fighting them back off. And now the question to our viewers: what do you, dear viewers, think the Kremlin will do next? What is that? Mass mobilization or retreat, maybe? Trying to distract Ukrainian partners with a new war somewhere else or frozen conflict? Just give it a vent. Give us your opinion in the comment section below. Let us know. Thank you. And don't forget to hit like on this video, subscribe to our channel. Thank you so very much, Preston. We're saying our goodbyes to you. So hit the bell, dear viewers, and don't miss the latest news and the deepest analysis on Ukraine, global security, and international politics. My name is still Henry Keane. We still are UATV. See you on this Monday. Have a great and safe weekend. Goodbye.